My guest today is Mr. Bill Outlaw. He is from Virginia and is a board member of the Nottoway County Public Schools. Bill, welcome to the State of Education podcast.
Melvin, great to be here. Thanks for having me on your program.
Well, delighted that you can join us. We want to learn from you. We want to share things with our audience that can help other people because at the end of the day, we're all working together to make better schools, better equipped students. And so thank you again. So we're excited to hear your story and experience in providing leadership to your county schools. But why don't we just start off by why don't you tell us more about yourself, about your background, and what caused you to eventually step forward and serve your community by providing leadership to your schools?
I'm a retired U.S. Army aviator of 41 years. I was a slow learner. We moved to Nottoway County a little over 20 years ago. My wife and I became involved early on in a variety of different community activities that would help youth. I have four children. They have been educated in private schools, public schools, and home schools. I'm also the chairman of the Nottoway County Republican Committee and have been in that capacity for about 6.5 years now. I decided to run for the school board because I'd attended school board meetings, read articles in the paper and discussions with other people, had a number of issues that were mostly personnel related. And I had the opportunity to run in 2019. I did. I was elected. And I pretty quickly learned that my due diligence was not all that it should have been. And right on top of taking office in December or January of 2020, COVID hit. So we've had our challenges here in Nottoway. We've had some recent changes. And I am really excited about what we might accomplish going forward.
That's awesome. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to speak with you is, on this show, we talk to a lot of different people. And often, school board members that we talk to are from, states and large counties or cities, and, they're, serve huge populations and sometimes have billion-dollar budgets. Others, like yourself, are really, you serve quite a rural community in some ways, and some would say it's resource limited. And I think probably as we go across the whole country, there are many more districts like your own than there are of the great big metropolitan or big, consolidated school districts. And so I think it's important for us to hear from all of these points because it's talking to the American public, and we need to be able to connect with and identify more closely to more individuals. So as we talk a little bit today, I'd like to explore a few things with you that may be insightful and reflective and helpful to communities who are listening today. Why don't we start by you just telling us more about your county schools, the schools themselves, your budget, and what are your greatest operational challenges?
Nottoway County has a population of about 18,500. Our school division is currently forecast to have a little over 1,750 students, so it's very small. Our budget this year is about $45 million, and we have 5 schools. We have 2 primary schools, an intermediate school, a middle school, and a high school.
So your intermediate school, are these based on grade levels or other issues?
They are based on grade levels, and we are one of less than 10% of the school divisions in Virginia that have an intermediate school.
All right. And so you've been at it now a couple of years. You talked about COVID and the challenges as that has. You want to talk about that a little bit more and kind of how you navigated that as a community. And do you want to talk to us a little bit more about I really want to focus on budgets. I know that's an area that you focus on. It's important to you because it's so important to the community. But just the general challenges of operating with your situation there.
Okay, with COVID, and it hit the spring after this current board took office, and like everybody in the country, we didn't know what we were facing. We had no idea what the government at the federal and state level were going to impose on us. And it was, I think, simply put, a nightmare for pretty much 2 years. Things would change on a weekly, if not more frequent basis. Wear masks, don't wear masks, do this, don't do that. So it was hard to make any long-range plans. And as I'm sure you're well aware, we are now beginning to see the effects of some of these decisions on our children. There was a recent article in the Epic Times on the crisis in education, and boy, oh boy, are we seeing it.
Mm-hmm. So talk to us a little more about that. You're talking about learning loss and emotional health and other things of that nature. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
And how are you seeing that in your area?
Well, backing up just a little bit, and this is across the country, we are seeing shortages with teachers, substitute teachers, bus drivers, everything. And this is not not uncommon. We currently, and I guess we're fortunate even for being as small as we are, our current hiring needs are 36 teachers, which is small. We have a large school division not too far from here, and they have a deficit of 500. And how in the world,
wow,
they're going to deal with that. My heart's out to them on that.
Yeah.
The learning losses are, I don't know how we're going to be able to quantify that going forward. I mean, for some, it'll be a lot dependent on, the students themselves, the family, and how they interact with their kids. So, I mean, it's a multifaceted problem in dealing with the needs of some of these students, the younger students in particular. I read a story of one little child was almost 3 years old. His mother, and he couldn't speak. He couldn't talk, which we're finding out is a problem that we can trace back to all of the government restrictions because of COVID. And he was taken to a speech therapist, and the mother handed him over, and the kid just screamed for about 3 hours. He'd never been with anyone but mama. And you can advance that a little bit. And I mean, some of these kids today, they haven't interacted with other children their age, which is vital, particularly in the earlier ages. They haven't done that. They don't know how. And that creates problems in the classroom. the teachers, there'll be 4 or 5 kids at a time screaming at a teacher, and she's trying to teach. You can't. That's not a learning environment.
Thank you for sharing that. And that is, it's a sad reality that we're in, but it is true. Some things, obviously, Monday morning quarterbacking, we can see lots of things that could have been done differently. The reality is, I think we've got to give some grace to everyone because, people were trying to work their way through these challenges, trying to do so in a responsible way, hopefully making decisions based on safety and stuff. It's sometimes it seems like decisions were made not so much around interest and care for the students as it was for employees and maybe union people, which I get it. Everybody needs protection. Everybody needs to be represented. But at the end of the day, the ones that are most impacted are our kids. And that's where we are seeing the backlash now. And I think there's going to require an awful lot of diligence to help recover the things that we've lost. And some things may never be recovered. But let's dig in just a little further. Let's talk more about your budget. So let's start with where does your money come from? So, a lot of we're trying to help people understand how most systems work. And so money typically comes from the feds, from the state, and from your local county. Do you know what that breakdown is for you there in Nottoway?
I don't have the percentages. We have a relatively small amount comes from the feds. However, since COVID, there have been a number of grants available, and we have a very capable person on our staff that has pursued those diligently. They've helped a lot. Of course, they come with a lot of strings attached. Then the state, we get a lot of our funding there, and the local government and our board of supervisors have been very good. They, I think, realize the some of the problems that we're facing, and they have been very good about stepping up to the plate and going above and beyond what the local match is as required by the state. And we're probably more fortunate than many school divisions in that regard.
Do you know how much of the county budget the education system gets?
I don't know the percentage, but we're the largest recipient of Nottoway County taxpayers' dollars.
Yes, and I could have practically guaranteed that to be true because that's pretty much a universal truth. Our education systems far and away exceed other budget items in a county budget and in a city budget almost always. Sometimes, well up into the 70 percentile of a county's budget goes to schools. And of course, that varies from location to location. But what that tells us, a couple of things. First of all, the significance of our educational systems and offerings. I mean, it's probably the number one employer in your county. It impacts multiple people. So, that's a major factor. The other factor, of course, is that, it's really, sometimes we've done some shows really talking about the investment for education, because it's not just something we have to fund. It is an investment in the future. And so that's why the feds, usually the feds put in somewhere between 6 and 8% of the resources. And those monies, like you said, always come with lots of strings attached. And I'd be interested in a statement from you if you want, for the amount of funding you get, how much does it actually cost for you to fulfill all the strings attached? And is it really money that is well used and beneficial to your system? I ask that question to a lot of people, and I get different answers. What are your thoughts?
First off, Richmond, Virginia does not know Nottoway County. They don't know our needs. And if Richmond, Virginia does not know our needs, certainly the federal government does not know our needs. So, personally, I don't think the government at the state or federal level has any business in education. And I would much rather have the tax rate lowered so that we can, on both those entities, and have that money used at the local level as we see fit. Because I think, even though we're small and rural, we know best what our population is and what our needs are.
Yeah. Well, that's a great answer, and you're not alone in thinking that. That's so true. All right, so just kind of a quick follow up on this, without beating it to death. Do you know how money is allocated in your budget? So, how much of it is really allocated by state or federal mandates? How much of it goes into, particular departments? And I don't need a list of all of them, but where does the majority of money go to? Are you seeing trends? And I know you haven't been there a long time, but, trends in increases in spending. For example, many schools are saying, okay, we're stagnant with our teachers and our support staff, but the spending is just going out the roof in administrative, because all the mandates and with the systems that are being generated, they're just loading the schools with more and more administrative help, which is actually channeling all the money instead of really getting it down to the students. What are your thoughts on that? Are you experiencing that at all?
The lion's share of our budget goes to instruction. We have, I think, from on the administrative side, we are pretty lean. We have had needs. One example, assistant principals. The state requires that for a school to be authorized an assistant principal and receive the funding associated with that, they got to have 400 students. Well, in my way of thinking, that's a pretty arbitrary figure. And, whether you got 200 or 400, the principal has tremendous demands placed on their time. And if we had and we only have currently, well, we just hired a second, but we only had up until just 2 weeks ago, one assistant principal out of 5 schools, and that was in the high school. We've just hired one for the middle school, and we're working on assistant principals for all of our schools. And that need is amplified tremendously because of again, getting back to COVID, the impacts there. And the principals need to be spending, at least our views, need to be spending time in the classroom, seeing what's going on and determining what, if any, help teachers need. We've got some great teachers. but they are having to do things they've never had to do, put up with things they've never had to put up with in the past. And our principals need to know that. And they can't do that if they're sitting behind a desk somewhere. Let me give one example. Middle school. Those kids, they're going through a lot of developmental changes in the best of times, puberty. And I can't imagine. It's been a long time since I was there. Add to those difficulties some of the things we're seeing from COVID now, and this is across the country. This is not just in Nottoway, but we have more fights. We have more discipline problems in a variety of different areas, and principals need to be on scene to deal with those more than they've been able to do because of some of their other responsibilities. And there's no. This is a complicated problem, I think, and I'm sure will vary from division to division, but I think there's a lot of common denominators, across public education in the country.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So you start talking a little bit here about some of the school performance issues, and let's dig in there just a little bit. You've talked about the need for principals and assistant principals who can really be there on the ground, observing what's going on in the classrooms, supporting the teachers, really understanding what's going on in the student population, working up plans and strategies in order to help them not only catch up on learning gaps, but deal with other issues that are going on, behavioral issues you mentioned. Let me ask you this. Now, I know this is something that has been going on for a while, but it seems like has just really escalated recently. Different mandates and different things that are being passed down as part of the, quote, learning curriculum in our classrooms. Some would say, contrasting learning, it's indoctrination and ideology. Are you seeing these kinds of things? Are these mandates happening in your schools, or are there efforts? Are there, is it driven by mandates from above? Are you seeing it? If you're seeing it, is it primarily through activist teachers? What's your experience as a board member and as an observer of your system?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think this whole issue, again, COVID sticks its head in. And of course, the change in administration in 2020. But, and I often ask the question, how is it that we have plenty of time to indoctrinate our children, but we don't have the time to educate them? And we see CRT, transgender issues, LGBTQ, RSTU, VW, XYZ, all of these things that we seem to have time and are promoted from the state and federal level and other activists. But our kids are suffering in reading and math and just about every subject. And nationally, you can look at the statistics, how we compare to other countries. Some other countries which are barely above third world status, and they outperform our kids academically. Yeah, how can that be?
Let me ask you point blank on this, because your response is that this kind of stuff is going on in your school system, which is a small rural community. And a lot of times parents and other leaders in the community, they think of their schools as these pristine places that are safe, that are, man, when I went to school there, it was awesome, even 10, 15, 20 years ago. But I'm increasingly hearing from folk across the country that these are not just isolated things you hear about in the news, like Loudoun County and Fairfax and other places, in Los Angeles and Chicago. But in all reality, this stuff has deeply penetrated down to every structure of the broader system. Are you seeing that in your county?
Not out in the open that I'm aware of. And does it go on? I would like to say no, but I can't say that. I'm hoping that now, and that's going to be one of my major goals, is to ensure that, or try to ensure that we have the business of educating our kids as our number one priority, and not some of these social agendas that are harming education. We have had, I know of one teacher that was, this has been actually a couple of years ago, was talked to by the principal and said that that kind of behavior is not something that we want here. Our libraries, I'm sure you're well aware of some of the books that have been in school libraries. I've known the head librarian in the public schools here for years, and spoken with her, and she guarantees me none of the titles that I've mentioned are on our school library shelves. So that's a good thing. Some of the others, and the thing I think everybody needs to realize, until when did the CRT issue, really blow up? About a year and a half ago, the people that are promoting things like CRT and these other agendas, they're not stupid. So they become more subtle in their approaches, which makes it that much more difficult to ferret out problems like this. And I certainly don't have any magic answer for that.
Yeah. Well, but diligence is important at every level. And the board is the one that hires and fires, and it has a really controlling stake in the future of your schools. So obviously, as you work together as a team, I know that you're always working to bring improvements. Let me ask you this. So you implied that you felt like you had some really good teachers, that by and large your administration and all of that were doing a great job. And outside of the consequences primarily from restrictions placed from COVID, do you feel, and maybe even historically pre-COVID, were students in your community thriving? Because that is ultimately what everybody wants to see. They want to see students thriving, because when the students are learning, they become sharp, intelligent, motivated members of community as they start to grow up. They have, basically when we have great schools in our communities, what that does is that enables, the local community to flourish. It helps students want to stay in their communities, because jobs tend to come where students are well equipped and thriving and capable. So where are you in that? I know you're kind of came in and you hit COVID and all this stuff. And I know, you're a long-term professional. Where do you see all this? And you said you were really excited about some things you thought were coming up. Do you want to talk into that realm a little while?
Yes. And I think and this again is a nationwide problem, absentee fathers, single parent households. And I see that as one of the biggest challenges that we have in Nottoway County. We have parents that are not much past being children themselves and have not had the role models to equip them for the job. And this has been going on for a few generations now. So that, I think, is one of our biggest problems, is parental involvement. Now, we've got some parents that are just phenomenal, and I'll tell you, you don't want to get in their way. They do some really tremendous things for the school and all students. So we're blessed there, but we've got the other problem, and that's a tough one.
Yeah. So, Bill, you were just talking about parental engagement and how some of the parents are fantastic and others maybe a little delinquent. But let me ask you this question. Sometimes when parents don't feel like they have options, when it's just kind of a dead end street for them, and maybe sometimes because they're just used to having everything done for them, and so they're not going to do anything just because they expect you to do it for them or somebody else to do it for them. And I don't say that in any demeaning way, but it's a behavioral thing that can be learned. Let me ask you this about your community. Do you have school choice options? What are your thoughts on school choice options? You stated that you yourself at homeschool, you'd had them in private schools, you'd had them in public schools. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think that kind of concept, really a concept of educational freedom, does it exist in your community? Should it exist in your community? And what values do you think it could bring?
I am 100% plus pro-choice in schools. My youngest daughter has a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old and soon to be another. And she has just chosen recently to homeschool her 5-year-old. And I'm thrilled at that. My opinion is, if you want your child to have a truly good education, the only option you have is homeschooling. Now, with that being said, that certainly is not an option for a lot of people. Private schools, we have a very good private school in Nottoway County. My youngest child, my son, went there except 4 years when he was homeschooled. My youngest daughter went there, and they do a really good job, and they did an exceptional job through COVID. But again, that's not an option for a lot of people. So we owe it to the children in our community to give them the absolute best public education that we can. That's a work in progress.
Yeah. So I agree. Your role is really to lead the public education, though, and to some extent, your interest is for all students in all forms of the education process there. So, we talk and have talked for years about school choice. In more recent years, there's more focus on what's called education freedom. That's really with education savings accounts, and basically legislation like West Virginia has, Arizona most recently created a universal program for that, where every student, regardless of where they are educated, every student in the state has a certain amount of money, it's state money, that is put into an account, and the parent of that child can use that money to help educate that child regardless of their choice in educational options. In other words, the focus is that the money follows the child, not the institution. For a long time, the whole focus was around the institution, and it became public school versus private school versus homeschool. And the focus was never really around what's best for the student. It was really about, who are we going to fund and who are we not going to fund when it comes to organizations. And so, the new trend really is we should break that down and let all organizations and institutions compete through their abilities and through their competency for the enrollment of those children, and let the parents decide where that money gets spent. And that would help improve the quality of education in our communities. What are your thoughts on that? And is that something that, I know as school board members, you always have opportunities, particularly a period of time every year, where you can address the state legislature with ideas. Is that an idea that you think would be valuable to your community and to communities across the Commonwealth?
Absolutely. I totally agree with what you just said. Public schools for too long have had a monopoly. And I don't know of a single case where monopolies provided the consumer with the best options.
Mm-hmm.
What's the incentive? And a guy making a widget and somebody else comes up with a better way to make a widget, that's where the people are going to go.
Yep.
Parents have not had that option educating their children.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing that now. And it kind of gets back to what I said. In the absolute perfect world, the government would be out of education, except possibly at the local level. All that money would be right here.
Yeah.
So the problem would be taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah. One person put it this way, why is it that the government seems to not trust parents with the ability to make good decisions for their children? And so they are going to force us to pay them to educate, and and if we decide we're not going to, they're going to take our property. And that puts things in a real perspective, both at the federal and the state level. And I think you make a strong point that if we didn't have those elements digging into our pocket without our consent, then all of a sudden there would be a whole lot more money left at the local level for communities to do what they felt was best, whether it was educating their kids, building bridges, or any other kind of thing.
Well, what got Glenn Youngkin elected governor of Virginia last year?
Yeah.
Parents are the ones, and that's in the Code of Virginia. Mm-hmm. That's the parents' responsibility. And parents, I hate to say this, and you alluded to it, parents have kind of gotten away from that, yeah, my child is my responsibility. And they would rather give that child up for however many hours a day to be educated, and they think their job is done. That's far from the case.
Yeah. So let me wrap it up with another question for you here. Last question. Our target audience is parents, grandparents, educators, and legislators. Is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners that you believe may be solutions-based when it comes to engagement with our children and their education?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest problems we have with parents and grandparents is apathy. And they've got to get past that. They've got to get involved. They need to know. And that was one of the beauties of COVID is parents were seeing what, because the kids were online at home, a lot of parents were seeing what was going on. So there's been an awakening there. It can't stop where we are now.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of improvements to make.
Yeah. Well, Bill, I really appreciate you spending time with us today. Thank you for your insight. I wish you well in your service there in your own county, and trust that you'll be able to work with the team of people who are trying to help your children get back on track in their education, and trust you have wonderful success.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity, and thank you.
You're most welcome.